All right, so first and foremost, you guys got to remember a little bit about a history if we're talking about the American Revolution, right? We all know that Columbus discovers America, right? 1492, he reaches the Bahamas. Basically, after that, for centuries, Europeans begin to, explore and capture land and colonize the Americas, right? For centuries after 1492, right? So we get into the 1700s. Basically, during the 1700s, North America is controlled by Britain, France, and Spain. Okay, those are up there. We're going to talk about them a little bit later, but North America at that time in the 1700s is controlled by Britain, France, and Spain for the most part, right? For the most part. There's a lot of, Native American settlements in the West and all that good stuff, but for the most part, it's those three. Now, in the middle of the 1700s, 1750s-ish, Britain and France get into a little scuffle. They have some disputed territory. They're talking about, I want the land, I want the land. They go to war. Okay, we're not going to talk about that. That's not the American Revolution. Just know that Britain wins that war. Britain wins the war against France in 1754. And the big thing is they spent a whole lot of money during that war. So they're in big-time debt. Okay? So, biggest things we need to remember with the American Revolution. Okay? We're going to talk about causes, and we're going to talk about players. What caused the American Revolution, and obviously who's involved in the American Revolution. Okay? So, the first thing we'll talk about is the players. Okay? On one side, we have the colonists. Those are the Americans. Those are the patriots, okay? The colonists are the people that have lived in the New World for generations and generations. You know the 13 colonies right on the east coast of America, right? Those are all colonists who have dads and moms and grandfathers at this point who have lived in America. Not America yet, but lived in the New World, right? So they don't really consider themselves British anymore. So on one side, we have those colonists. On the other side, we have Great Britain, right? And Great Britain, again, very huge world power. They just defeated France, but they're in a lot of debt. So here's the deal. The one thing I think about, and this is why I have resilience up there, I think about resilience when I think about the American Revolution. It just helps me to think about the specific things when I'm thinking about it or talking about it, because resilience to me is it's standing up to injustice, and that's what the colonists did. They were very resilient in a lot of ways. We're not going to talk about the battles or anything like that into the specifics, but the battles are a good way to show how resilient they were. But basically, we're standing up to injustices, okay? So with those two players, the big ones, the colonists in Great Britain, we're going to talk about some of the causes. What was so bad about living under Great Britain? Why were the colonists so pissed off about living under Great Britain, right? The biggest thing is that, again, Britain was heavily in debt after that war with France. They needed money somehow. It's a very rich country. They don't have a lot of money anymore. We need to figure out some way to get some money, right? Let's tax these colonists. This is the first time that colonists had been taxed. 1765 is the Stamp Act. Okay, basically we're taxing a bunch of things that the colonists need. These are things like paper and lead, glass, paint, and tea, obviously, and we'll get to that. But the big thing, basically the argument was, how are we getting taxed by a country overseas, over an Atlantic Ocean? Why are we not in the decision-making process to be taxed? Not only could they not vote on whether they would be taxed, but they couldn't even express their opinions. Okay? Think about it like this. I was thinking about this on the way over here. Imagine if Miss Kavanaugh, is that right, the principal? Miss Kavanaugh comes over the speaker right now and says, good morning, students. Quick announcement. We have a vote today about the new school lunch program, right? Basically, we're going to have these new healthy meals. They're going to be super small portions. They're going to be like vegan, and they're going to be all these things, right? And you're kind of looking around, and you're like, wait a second, what? And she says, no, you're not going to be able to buy your lunch anymore. You're not going to be able to bring your lunch anymore. Oh, and by the way, your teachers are voting on this. You have no say in the matter. Obviously, if something like that happened, I would look around, you would look around, you'd be like, this doesn't sound right, right? That's exactly what the colonists were thinking. Why are we not involved in the decision-making process to be taxed? We have no representation in the British Parliament. That's what they mean by no taxation without representation. That's kind of the creed that they stood by. So that was a huge, huge cause of the American Revolution, was that taxes. So basically, just like you'd be if that happens with school lunches, you'd be mad, right? You'd be mad about it. Okay, so basically unrest spills into the streets of Boston in 1770, and we get the Boston Massacre. Have you guys heard of has anyone heard the term Boston Massacre before? Right, so basically, long story short, we won't get into it. that unrest from all these things that the British were doing to the colonists spilled out into the streets, okay? And King George over there from Britain sent over his militia and basically murdered 5 people in cold blood. And again, I think about this. I think about some of the things, making connections to things that happen today. Do you guys remember the Ferguson riots a couple years ago? You guys remember that? The Mike Brown case? Imagine this. Just imagine this. If Obama, he sees what's going on in Ferguson, he sees these people standing up and voicing their opinions, and he sends the National Guard, and they open fire, and they just kill a bunch of people in the street. Like, that would be chaos, right? It would be nuts. That's exactly what happened in Boston. So, again, just use some of the things in your life that you can make some of those connections with. That's what I do. It really helps me out as far as remembering some of these important things. So, after the Boston Massacre, 3 years later, I believe, in 1773, we have the Boston Tea Party. Now, this is huge. This is something you guys, I'm sure, have heard of, or, at least your teacher has talked about it at some point in front of you. You've heard of the Boston Tea Party, them throwing the cases of tea out into the Boston Harbor. It's a true story. Okay, basically, Great Britain monopolizes the tea trade. Basically, they give the East India Company a lower tax, and the East India Company can now go to the Americas and basically dominate the tea trade. Like I said, tea was one of those big things that was being taxed, and one of those big things that the colonists needed. Okay, the tea to the colonists was like coffee to us today. It still is, right? It's caffeine. Does anyone drink tea? Anyone drink tea here? A couple people drink tea. I'm a coffee guy, but imagine everyone drinking tea. They were dependent upon it. And there's that resilience again coming up. It's the fact that the colonists could have said, you know what, whatever, I need my caffeine, dude. I'm tired. I got to figure it out. They didn't do that. They said, I'm not going to put up with this taxation tyranny, they called it. We're not going to put up with this. We're going to sneak onto the boat. It's a great story. The Sons of Liberty, dressed as Mohawk Indians, I believe, and snuck onto the boat and started throwing like 300 some cases of tea off into the harbor. It was a very big moment for the cause in the American Revolution, because King George was not happy. Great Britain was not happy about that, and it really spurred the American Revolution. So then we get to like 1775. Everything starts happening. Okay, basically a smart group of individuals get together in Philadelphia. Okay, Continental Congress comes together and they say, enough is enough. We're sick of the taxation. We're sick of these people across the sea telling us what to do. We can do this ourselves. Who's going to lead that? They pick a guy named George Washington, a key player for the colonists to lead that colonial army. The Patriots, the Americans, same deal there, okay? So we have George Washington chosen to do that. Again, we're not going to talk about the battles. They start in 1775, go on to 76, 77, 78, goes on for a while, right? But again, if you have a chance to look at some of these battles, it's very interesting because, again, the resilience of the colonists is shown big time because they're not doing so well, okay? They're getting beaten in a lot of battles. There's long winters. People are dying. George Washington is still optimistic, but a lot of people are not very optimistic, right? So those battles kind of rage on. So we talk about some of those players, right? We've talked about the colonists in Great Britain. 1776, we have the Declaration of Independence, right? We celebrate that on July 4th. Everybody knows the Declaration of Independence. That was penned by Thomas Jefferson. And then these two guys, John Adams and Ben Franklin, were kind of like editors to it, right? They kind of pushed it through and got it to be where it needed to be. It was a very inspiring document. And again, it's enough is enough. We need our freedom. We need to be independent. And they put it in writing. So it's a very, very big point. But the big thing, and I like to think that the Declaration of Independence was huge, right? Obviously, it's a huge document. We've all heard of it, just on the same par as the Constitution. But not everyone was buying into it. Some people were still thinking, like, I don't know if I want to go to war with Great Britain. Like, they're powerful. They got guns. They got really good military, huge navy. I don't know about that. Okay. Then comes a guy named Thomas Paine. Okay. Thomas Paine releases a pamphlet called Common Sense. It's still around. You can look it up online. It's a really, really cool document. Basically inspiring. It's like an inspiring little pamphlet that was given out to all these colonists that said, we need to unite together. We need to stand up. We need to stand forth, I believe was the verbiage he used, and stand up against this tyrant. So anyone that wasn't inspired by some of the military things that were going on, they read Thomas Paine's Common Sense pamphlet, and they were like, this may be something that we can get behind. So that was a huge thing as far as players were concerned as well. So again, let's fast forward, not going into battles. Remember, they're battling in 75, 76, 77, and then something really, really big happens. This is something that, you definitely would write about in a paper, is the fact when France comes in to help the colonists, things start going very good. Okay, 1778, France comes in, and they start helping these colonists. And that's a huge, huge deal. The next year, Spain comes in 79, and then the Dutch come in as well. So as you can see, the colonists, especially country-wise, have a lot of stuff going for them, right? So some of these battles start to turn around. Some of these things that were not happening for the Americans started to turn around. And basically, let's see if this is still playing. And basically, we get to, well, it's kind of a battle, but I just like to mention Yorktown, Virginia, in 1781. General Cornwallis, terrible name, I know, but he's in a bunch of movies and stuff like that. General Cornwallis, and he basically finds himself in Yorktown, Virginia, and we have the French coming from this side, from the sea, and the Americans, the colonists coming from land, and we're good to go, right? So at the end of the day, that's huge. That's really, really big. And that's basically the end, right? So, but basically, when we get down to brass tacks, it's not the end of the war, right? Because King George is still sitting over there in Great Britain, very optimistic that he can keep these colonists in line, okay? He's saying, you know what, I don't care that Cornwallis is done. I don't care that we're losing these battles. We need to keep going. Luckily for us, I think their prime minister, I think his name was Lord North, he resigns. A new prime minister comes up. A lot of things go on. Long story short, he recognizes America's independence. So it's huge. But again, that's kind of going through the whole thing. But the things that we need to remember, obviously the causes and the players. The players are the most important. We have to know who's involved in the American Revolution, right? We have Great Britain here, and we have the colonists, right? Just remember that Great Britain was always just, throwing stuff at the colonists. Taxes, right? You were subjects. You had the Boston Massacre. You had the Boston Tea Party. All of these terrible things that the British were doing, at some point, those colonists felt the need to stand up, right? And say, enough is enough. Let's fight. And they did. And it wasn't a war that was very optimistic. You study history, you're like, I don't know how they won. They had a lot of allies to help them out, but it was big. And then the last thing I'll say, again, is that resilience deal. That's what they were. That's what, basically, they stood up to injustice. That's the way I think about it. Those colonists were standing up to injustices done to them by the British Empire, right? And when I think about that, I think about, all those great men and women in the 1700s that stood up to injustice. But understand that you might not believe it, the people are still standing up for injustice today. And that I'd like to believe that. You look at the media, you guys have seen the media and all that stuff, and it might seem like a divided country, like, why should I care about the revolution? You should care about what's going on right now, right? Because there's a lot of good stuff, but a lot of bad stuff as well going on in this country, right? But understand, something that I believe, something I think you should believe, is that there's a lot of good people that are standing up to injustice, that are being really resilient, just like they were in the 1700s. People are still doing that today, so believe that. And other than that, I think we got a little bit of everything. If you have any questions or anything, I'm sure Ms. Natowski or myself can answer those. So
basically, I just want to point out, why is it such a big deal that France, then Spain, and the Dutch come